He's one of India's leading comic artists, in fact, not confining himself to Indian shows anymore. He's an actor, he's a columnist and a musician as well. He's also got a new set out on Netflix, one that is being very well received so far. Well, my great honor to introduce Veer Das, someone who doesn't need much of an introduction. Thanks very much, Veer, for taking our time to speak to us. Up first, what's been the response like? And how difficult really has this been? Because this is not about making fun of Indians in India alone, but you're also at the same time having a laugh at Americans in America.
It's been great. I didn't fully understand how large an audience Netflix had. You know, it's one of those things that you read on PowerPoint presentations that they have this many in these things, but then when your phone starts getting messages every 30 seconds from literally everywhere in the world, you realize how large an audience is, and it only came out like 5.5 days ago. So the fact that we're talking about it 5.5 days later is crazy. So I didn't expect the kind of response that it has. Indians have gotten behind the special in a very cool way. I think partly because it relates to Indians and partly because I'm making fun of other people. So that's maybe why Indians like it. So yeah.
Right, perhaps proof that a good joke is a good joke anywhere in the world and it always works?
I think so. I think funny is funny anywhere in the world. A good joke is always at somebody's expense. And if that somebody whose expense it's at is also laughing at the joke, that means it's going to work.
Well, interesting you would say that because, you know, in India, especially, you know, in recent times, we often wonder whether Indians have a sense of humor. And, you know, these days, like I said, when people seem to be a bit too touchy, a bit too sensitive, how does all of this impact you? I mean, after all, we also saw that there was a plea for ban on Sardar jokes that made its way all the way to the Supreme Court.
I think if you start thinking about that stuff, you'll go insane. You just have to kind of preface a comedy show with the right context, right? So when I come out, you know, in the Netflix special, you know, it's a stadium of people, but I start out by saying, I'm a patriotic Indian. I love my country. I'm proud enough of my country to parody my country. That's why I've sat and written, you know, 6 months of jokes about my country, because I love my country. So the minute you preface your show with that, most people tend to be okay. Having said that, I think if you start to pre-censor yourself, you know, India is like a very big joint family, you know, and some chacha who's sitting at the far end of the table is not going to like the bhindi, and somebody else is not going to like the karela. You know, so you can't think about what people are going to get upset at because you literally never know. All the jokes you think you're going to get away with, you're never going to get away with, you know?
So like, while there may be many like you who are speaking their mind freely and, you know, without any fear at all, there are others who say that they do often find themselves censoring their comments, censoring their jokes. The usual line, and perhaps understandably, is who wants to really court any trouble, get into any tamasha or headline, especially in the age of social media. Now, how do you deal with this beast called social media? There's a lot of affection out there, I've noticed, for you, but there's also some serious and pretty vicious trolling.
I don't. For me, there's an ostrich philosophy where I kind of stick my head in the sand for trolls. What trolls don't realize is for every one guy who says some nasty negative thing about me, he's creating 100 people that say positive things. So if you're a troll, you just haven't realized that you're building my fan base and that you're increasing my fan base. You can't think about these things. I think the only solution to this stuff is more comedy. You have to keep doing this stuff until people understand, listen, we're fools, we're clowns, we're jesters. We're supposed to fall down. We're supposed to make complete asses of ourselves. And you're not supposed to read into this stuff too much. So the only solution to that is to keep joking, giving them more comedy until they understand.
So does it really get frustrating? I would imagine it does.
Of course it's frustrating. But what profession isn't frustrating? You know what I mean? I love your news channel, but don't you watch other news channels and get frustrated? So, you know.
No, actually, I was talking about the naysayers and, you know, how they react to you. How do you sort of deal with that? Do you ever sort of have a bad day and say, I just can't deal with it? Or are you sort of always have a joke up your sleeve or always have a witty response?
I think, look, no matter what you're doing, there's going to be naysayers at the end of the day because you're expressing a point of view. The problem with stand-up is it is very directly your point of view on the world. But I think a lot of times we, especially in India, trolls don't come from a place of hatred, they come from a place of over-intellectualization. In the Netflix special, for instance, I talk about racism, I talk about homophobia, I talk about Article 377, we talk about Kashmir, we talk about India, Pakistan, we talk about Trump, we talk about our government. But in every comedy show, there are things that you say because they're funny. There are things that you say because you want to make people uncomfortable. There are things that you say that they've heard a million times before. And then there are things that you say just to be stupid, like you would say them on a child's playground. Now, if you're going to read equally intellectually into all 5 of those things, that's when things start to get hectic, So, and oftentimes people read into the childish stuff or into other stuff as well. So you just kind of have to let that go. You have to live with that.
I can imagine that. Well, in the last couple of days, there's of course who've been making headlines with this act on Netflix. There's also been Hasan Minhaj and, how he still has us laughing. And all those, of course, who've also commented on this new breed of this new wave of comics around the world. And they're saying that these are intelligent people, they're articulate people, they're also absolutely fearless. So they are being compared to the new journalists. At the risk of putting my own job on the line, would you agree with that?
Okay, so firstly, I don't think comedians are taking the place of journalists. Please don't put that kind of pressure on comedians. You know what I mean? So what Hasan Minhaj did is insanely good. I mean, he just killed it, but it's an 80-year-old tradition where the fourth estate meets the president and they shake hands and acknowledge each other and parody each other. Except this time it was a one-way street. He didn't show up. But if you're going to label him as a crusader who is always going to do that, you limit him and take away his freedom to be stupid in the future. And at the end of the day, that's what we are. We're fools. We're idiots. So we should be able to go from talking about Donald Trump or talking about Modi to then talking about our dog or brushing our teeth. You have to give that freedom to comedians, whereas journalists just have to be journalists. So I definitely don't think comedians are the new journalists. I don't think we're intellectuals or crusaders. Just let us be comedians and all of that other stuff will just take care of itself. Sometimes you see, but I think part of the problem is that comedians aren't the only ones doing comedy. A lot of people tell me, why are you talking about politics? I'm like, because politicians are doing comedy as well. So, then we're kind of in the same arena to talk about each other. But I think the best thing we can do is just let comedians be comedians.
Okay, fair enough. You're saying that, at the end of the day, you are comedians and not crusaders. Fair enough. But there are, as far as the Indian comedy scene is concerned, you're also seeing the likes of, say, Aditi Mittal, Radhika Vaz, there's of course you. And there are several others who are coming out, speaking their mind, commenting on social issues, commenting on problems that women are facing, problems that, that confront the country today. So, is this a space that's now evolving, you think, or is it still too early to call it that?
I think it's more evolved than we give it credit for. By the way, Radhika or Aditi or myself, etc., we're a very small bucket in the ocean. India has a long tradition of very intellectual satire that has always happened in Urdu and in Hindi. So artists like Surinder Sharma or artists like Johnny Lever and Hasya Kavi Mukablas have achieved more intelligence and more sort of dry sarcasm and wit and satire than we have. We're new to the table. We're new to the party. But the fact that there's that many people consuming our stuff is wonderful. It's only going to get better from here.